Like we can read their minds when they listen to the podcast.
Yeah, we just don't know it. Like we don't realize we're doing it because we're just too busy.
Oh man, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, wouldn't that be crazy? Maybe
Yeah,
that's what's going on.
I would be content to know any thoughts from anyone listening, but you know,
absolutely.
I haven't heard much feedback. So
Well, check this out. If we're not receiving feedback, let's look into mind control for it.
okay, yeah, we'll just
Down
might have
for
to
it?
do it without their consent, I guess. I don't know.
So anyone who's listening to this podcast, be prepared to have your brains dissected by us at some point.
Yeah, we're gonna be digging around in your brain.
So welcome to the show. And this show is called Accelerativ Thrust. And
we're gonna get through this introduction no matter what.
Yeah, I like how we always struggle with introductions, but it feels natural.
Well, yeah, it shouldn't be that hard. We only have 3 things to say. See, I can't even say it. Accelerativ Thrust, Dan, Erik.
You sounded like me.
Yeah, I think accelerative is a slightly difficult word for me.
It really is. It's a tongue twister. It reminds me of a car. Makes sense because the accelerator.
Yeah.
And you're thrusting sometimes in a car. So
in the back seat, you mean?
Yeah, like in the back seat, yes.
So how I know I'm just a dirty old man telling dirty jokes.
Yes. Exactly.
How's your week been?
Well, my week's
we haven't recorded in a little while.
Actually. Yeah, that's true. It has been quite a while. It's been pretty good. I was just watching a documentary about MTV, and I was telling Erik, I already told him this story about how when they were hiring the VJs, they had like a newspaper article that just basically gave like directions to this like apartment, this sketchy looking apartment in New York. And so when the VJs went to go actually interview for their jobs, and this was before they had their jobs, obviously, they just walked into this like dingy dark room with like a spotlight at a chair. And that's how they were like asked questions. But anyway, do you have any memory of like watching MTV back then? Like when you were like,
I remember MTV like starting. I mean, we didn't have it in Muscatine right away. It was at least a year or 2 after it started.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember how strange the videos were, specifically like Total Eclipse of the Heart and like Putting on the Ritz by Taco. And everything was just real strange, these weird little movies. And then a lot of videos that were seriously just like some live thing that they put together, because they were using a lot of things that weren't really made to be videos. They were just filling the air with like promotional videos or live performances and things like that. So but I remember feeling pretty connected to sort of youth culture and coolness, and it was awesome that the whole country was sort of watching it at the same time. Shared experience. So yeah, I loved MTV. It was like one of the coolest things that happened in my childhood.
Yeah, same here. I definitely remember, watching like Huey Lewis and the News and all of the iconic like MTV videos. And yeah, you're right. Those early MTV videos were very strange. There was like this underlying darkness to like everything. It was really weird. Like just, and then like, yeah, it's also strange to think that when MTV first started, they didn't really have enough videos to justify to keep playing like new artists at first. So then, yeah, like you were saying, they would make videos for songs that were already like, like Ramones' I Want to Be Sedated, which that record came out like years before MTV. But for some reason, that was the song off of that album that they decided to make a video for. And like, and then eventually it became like, okay, well, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're just going to play new artists now.
Yeah.
You know, it's the evolution of MTV is a very interesting thing. And then I remember early on the shows like Remote Control.
Oh, I loved Remote Control. That was
so did I.
my favorite thing ever made, probably when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I got to feel so smart for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
I really, I don't think it was in the 80s, but in the mid 90s, at least, maybe even early.
Oh, yes.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Me too.
I learned about the Residents. I learned about Guar. Yep. I learned about other bands that didn't wear giant masks on their head.
Right.
And right. I loved it. MTV, for as pointless as it might seem to me now, it really was a really cool thing to grow up with MTV the way it was, you know?
Well, I think the other thing is, commercial as they were and all unapologetically, there was a lot of like really exploring like strange moments where they were really exploring like underground and outsider culture, like the what was it, like 1988 or 1989, they had some special where Daniel Johnston just crashed, like
I remember,
and he just
seeing that.
Gets up and they focused the camera on him for like 2 minutes, and then Daniel Johnston just got to basically, he just broadcasted his little songs to the world. And that's for as many people who like want to bash MTV, and it's understandable now as a 40-year-old who grew up, you know, during the time, why people would want to. There was a lot of really important shit that MTV really helped promote.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just really like you said, I would have never heard of the Residents, Gore, or Ween if it wasn't for MTV.
For sure.
Know? I think those bands also would not get the level of exposure that they did if it wasn't for MTV as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but even like through Headbangers Ball and it was the cutting edge and became 120 minutes through those shows, like a lot of people got exposure that otherwise probably wouldn't have. And those were commercial in their own way, of course, but at the same time, I mean, I can't even describe how many bands I discovered on there between that and Off the Beaten Track on KFMH in Muscatine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I found out about everything. There was nowhere else to go. You didn't really have the internet. So it was like on Sunday night, you either had to watch 120 or record Off the Beaten Track or vice versa. And I would take notes. Like every week I'd have 5 to 10 bands I wanted to try to find out more information about, which was actually really hard. It wasn't like you just searched it and had access to every record they ever made. Yeah. Like, well, I guess I'll go see if Musicland has these, or if I can find a magazine that talks about it or something.
Yep. And if you go to Musicland, more times than not, if it was a really unpopular band, they'd be like, well, we can special order it for you.
Yeah.
And then so you would have to buy the CD having never listened to it. Like it's cool, like what we've got now, access to everything. But there was definitely something special about that period of time in the 80s and 90s,
I agree. Yeah, I kind of liked the idea that I would hear of a band. I'll never get the chance to hear them. Like, that's pretty fun, just like, they just live in your mind or something,
Yeah.
Like, so
yeah. And then having to track it, like you may, by some chance, like track it down later, like use it record collector, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Or, otherwise you're just like, God, lingers in the back of your mind until it bothers you enough that you're like, you know what, fuck it. I'm just going to go ahead and drop the $30.
Right.
It was amazing when you actually looked through Musicland in Muscatine. And it was amazing sometimes some of the stuff that they actually had. I remember like in the hip hop section, they actually had Atmosphere's God Loves Ugly in like the year like 2001.
Wow.
When it first came out. And this was before Atmosphere really made waves, So he was still an underground thing. There was actually a lot of like underground like stuff that Musicland carried for being a
yeah.
you know, you had to dig through everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had a dream about Musicland not that long ago.
Yeah, I think I might have too. Or I saw some photos, or I watched one of those videos where they go through a ghost town dead mall or something.
Oh yeah, the Muscatine Mall, yes.
Right. But yeah, I've definitely been in Musicland recently in a dream or a memory or some sort of media.
It was the weirdest thing. I actually had to like, and this is what was really strange is that I had to wake up and I had to actually think, is Musicland still open? Did it ever close down? Like it actually because it felt that real. Like I was walking into the record store. And anyway, then what was really interesting about the later that day is I went to go get a coffee, and the lady who was working behind the counter used to work at Musicland.
Wow.
And I remember I actually joked with her that, you know, I had a dream about Musicland, and she said that it was like her and her husband's dream to open up a record store again in Muscatine.
Wow. Cool.
And I went in there to get a coffee, and I was talking to her, and I told her about the dream that I had about Musicland.
So you know her already?
Yeah, I know her
outside of Musicland.
Well, I mean, I never hung out with her. I'm just
saying, like, if you walked into a place and it had been 20 years or something, and you just walked in and said, I had a dream about you at Musicland, it would be so creepy.
Well, yeah, but I didn't.
I was just thinking that would be a funny situation.
It would be creepy if you like said, oh, I had a dream with you in it at Musicland 20 years ago. Like, yeah, that would be something creepy for sure. Anyway, but she told me that it's her and her husband's dream to open up a record store in Muscatine again.
Nice. That'd be cool.
And I said, that would be badass. I just wonder how good it would actually go over in a place like Muscatine these days. Because even Iowa City can only keep one record store barely afloat, it seems like.
Yeah. Speaking of records.
Yeah, there's a lot of records out there that we like to listen to as well.
Yeah.
So, all right, we're gonna be doing the same thing. It's been 2 weeks since we talked to you guys about records. And so we got 2 records apiece, and then we're doing a local. And boy, am I excited about this one.
VoidDweller.
VoidDweller.
Yeah, we'll do that one near the end.
I've got a lot to say about that one.
Ooh.
It's good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. I got a lot to say about that one, let me tell you. Out of my 2, I'm going to start off with the rock side of things. And I am going to be talking about a record from Blackwater Holylight called Veils of Winter. So this actually is a record that I picked before I had the Accelerativ Thrust podcast. I had a YouTube channel, and I did a video which got taken down for some reason, or I took it down. I don't remember which one. Where I did like the top 20 albums of 2019. And this was actually my number 1 pick in 2019.
Whoa. Nice.
Blackwater Holylight, Veils of Winter. This is just, in my eyes, just a really fantastic record. There's a lot of great textures and a lot of it is on the surface kind of like a metal record, but I think there's just so much other stuff going on. There's definitely like a huge kind of shoegaze element kind of going on. Also, I guess like 90s alternative indie rock sort of thing. Some of the names of like recommended if you like that come to mind would be like Black Sabbath, Electric Wizard, but also PJ Harvey, Chelsea Wolfe, and even like maybe a little bit of like something like My Bloody Valentine. But overall, they just mix it all together. And I think that the vocals on this record are just gorgeous. They're just so, so good. And there's a lot of atmospheric sort of stuff. And yeah, there it is kind of doomy, but not, I mean, I definitely would not stop there in its description. There's some almost like Pixies-ish guitars, even like a little Modest Mouse-ish a little bit, like in some of the songs. It's got, you know, just it kind of the songs kind of change course, you know, within themselves a lot, which I really like quite a bit. And yeah, I mean, I just think that this was in 2019 my favorite record that came out then, and it still holds up very well. This is the first time I've listened to it in quite a while. And I also listened to their first album, which is the self-titled record, which I think is equally as good. The group is from Portland, and and I don't know the names of everybody who's in it, but yeah, I just think that really a fantastic record. I mean, I don't have much more to say about it other than I still think it's amazing. What did you think of it, Erik?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I have this personal adage that I always say, and anyone who knows me is sick of me saying it, but I feel like when it comes to stoner doom stuff, like I've always said before, like the Sabbath worship element of it, the thing that no one gets right is the sort of swing of it all.
Yeah.
You know? And this definitely does. It gets it right.
Yes.
It is heavy, slow, stoner doom. I mean, without a doubt. But there's elements of prog in there. There's elements of psychedelic. There are some synths. Yeah, it like I said, the riffs are super killer. Like they're not unlike something that is really stonerish, like Clutch, but they really do doom it up and they slow it down, and it does end up being something pretty different. They also branch out into some more up-tempo moments, which is, like I said, super nice to hear. Like I love stoner and doom stuff, but when it just sits there and doesn't do a lot, sometimes I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But really the thing that sets this apart is the vocals. They're gorgeous.
Yes.
I don't know the members' names either, but the main singer has a really beautiful voice. And then just in general. And then during most of it, there's like also 2 or even 3-part harmonies that remind me a lot of, and I'll mention them again. I mention them all the time, but the Roaches. But also, and this is going to sound like I'm being a jerk, but I am seriously not. The song Hazy Shade of Winter by the Bangles is one of my favorite songs. And the vocals of that, the production of it, and the harmonies, that's all I could hear in this Blackwater Holylight was that almost spot on production and harmonies. And they're really pretty. And it sets the whole thing off. It sets it just completely in its own place. So I think it's really pretty, and it comes off as well thought out and well done and super heavy. So
yes,
the things that I thought it sort of reminded me of were just heavy rock, like Wind Hand and things like that. It was a little sleep-ish at times, but also a little like Black Mountain at times. And actually, there's this band that I really like. I think they're from Chicago called Gone, Gaan. I don't even know if they're still around, but it had elements of that too. It's proggy, psychedelic, but super heavy. And the vocals are just, they set it off and it's really sweet. So yeah, I liked it a lot. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked that one, Erik.
Yeah, that's good. My first choice, I'm thinking I'm going to go with Giant Claw.
Okay.
The record's called Mirror Guide, came out in 2021. My wife told me about it, said, hey, I think you'll really like this. My nephew Owen told me about it. Owen is 16, but so I always think of like the Hard Times article where it's like kindergartner already listening to Ramones at third grade level,
Yeah.
That's kind of how Owen is. Like, he is 16. He has a kind of ambient vaporwave project called Skeesh that he's been doing for years, and it's really good.
Sounds really familiar.
And he's kind of coming into his own on that. But yeah, he's when he was like 14, he's like listening to Daughters and Flying Lotus and stuff.
Oh,
I'm just
crap.
like, who is this kid? But and it doesn't really have anything to do with me, which you would think, well, he might have told him about this stuff or got him into synths or whatever, but I really don't think so. I think he's just kind of on his own.
This
path.
Is your nephew?
Yeah. So
wow.
Cool kid. And yeah. So both of them told me about it, and I was like, well, I gotta check this out. If two people tell you specifically you would like this, and they were right. I loved it. At first, when it starts out, it seems like a pretty straightforward vaporwave kind of thing. Heavy use of the harpless strong string synthesis that I always talk about, those real harp plucked string sounds. There's a lot of ratcheting, sort of like clock dividing, that sort of sound that happens a lot with drums where it's like, does that kind of stuff. And so it seems like that's kind of what it's going to be. But then after a while, you're like, this is not just that, things will come in like real elements of jazz, like seemingly real trumpet, clarinet, things like that. And they'll come in with these movements that almost remind me of like Disco Volante era bungle. Like it's real strange. And then there's like real serious classical moments. There's a lot of post-rock movement to this whole thing. Like it gets real epic real fast and things like that. It's psychedelic. There's elements of choral music. There's elements of avant-garde noise, hard vapor, musique concrète, like just all kinds of stuff happening here, but it all sounds like it's supposed to be there. And I was pretty blown away by it. I just think of it, it's kind of like a really beautiful classical post-rock noise vaporwave record, your classic example of that. But it is refreshing, and I just found it endlessly like disarming. Like as soon as I thought I had my head around it, I didn't. And I just think it came off as a really interesting and pretty and exciting record. So yeah, what'd you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I really dug this a lot. It, like you, at first I kind of, thought, okay, yeah, this sounds like vaporwave, and with avant-garde experimental electronic elements kind of thrown in. And, there's a lot of really crazy sounds kind of going on, but like you said, it all fits together. And there's also a lot more going on than just that. The way that I kind of described it makes it sound like it's some crazy experimental record, when really it is experimental, but it's also, there's a lot kind of going on, and it just works together so well. I like one of the things, my two favorite moments on the record were the horns that got thrown in on the second track called Meerkam Startup.
Yep.
And what I really like about that is, this is what I wrote down, and I still stand by this. It sounds like a marching band warming up while taking acid, or free jazz, which, what's the difference between the two? Because that's what free jazz sounds like.
Yeah.
And then I like how the next track is called Meerkam Online. And that has almost like a jungle rhythm with elements of like spaz and digital hardcore kind of thrown in.
Right.
Just really a lot of instrumental sounds. I also like the contrast between the two tracks, because it actually it almost sounds like they're trying to convey like an actual like program warming up in the startup song. And then like it just kind of whatever needed to happen happened with the mirror cam online. And it's like, then it sounded crazy. Like it almost sounded like they were almost like trying to like make it sound like, okay, yep, we just got to wait a little bit and then this is going to open up. And then as soon as it opens up, it just goes crazy. And that's kind of, I don't know if that was what they were actually intending and if that was even, but that's what it felt like. So I'm assuming that maybe that's what they were trying to do with the titles of the song and everything. Some of it reminded me of like Ken Butler, a little bit of John Zorn, but I mean, it's really, really good. There was also some talking left in it, like at certain parts, which I thought was pretty cool and hilarious. Yeah. Like, I think like, you know, I'm not sure what that was about. I'm assuming it was just like, oh man, you know, like, you know how like sometimes you're like, oh, I messed that up. And sometimes you just choose to leave that in. Yeah. I thought that was really cool. Like, you know, cause it made it sound very, you know, made it sound almost like a punk approach to doing this kind of stuff, like in a weird sort of way. And then I also immediately thought of what you mentioned with, I think it was Fire Tools that you mentioned, public domain music. Like some of that kind of creeped into here a little bit also as well. I mean, it's really good stuff. I really enjoyed it a lot. Sweet. Okay. So now I guess we're on to my rap release of the week. This is from a rapper named BLU, spelled just BLU. The name of the record is York. Used to be called No York, but he changed the name. So BLU is a rapper from LA, and he collaborates with a lot of other rappers. He kind of reminds me of MF Doom in that sense, because MF Doom had a few solo albums, but he had probably more collaborative records than he did, or rappers under different alias, or rap albums under different aliases and things like that. And that's kind of what BLU reminds me of, because he does have a few official solo albums. I think maybe a couple that are just under the name BLU, but most of his other work is collaborating like a lot with this guy named Exile and he's got like other groups, like short-lived groups that put out like, you know, one album. So he's definitely more of a collaborative, like backpack style rapper. York is BLU's second official solo album. His first one, called Below the Heavens, came out in 2007. And that one is actually considered like an underground hip hop classic by many. And the difference in sound between this album and that album is pretty big. And it makes sense because this record, I think, came out in 2012. So there's quite a few years between the two. And that album, like all the way through, had like a real sort of, I don't want to say backpack rap, but you know, it had kind of a like an updated sort of Tribe feel sort of to it, things like that. And it was really, really good. But I feel like this record has more experimental, abstract elements, but I don't think I definitely wouldn't say that it's abstract to the point where it's, you know, just like really out there or anything, but there's just sound wise, there's like more elements of like, I don't know, video game music that's kind of thrown in, and some techno and maybe almost like chiptune like production. And I don't know if he had multiple producers on this record, but there's a lot of curveballs kind of thrown in, which I dig about it, but it's also, you know, just very much a rap record with really good lyricism, and there's quite a few guests on it. In fact, at times I kind of wonder if it's almost like an underground version of the Chronic or something, where it almost seems like he's showcasing a bunch of other rappers, you know, and he's kind of like the main sort of guy behind it, sort of thing. though he's not a producer like Dre was, or Dre is. He's a rapper. So I'm assuming he probably just had multiple producers on this record. But yeah, I still consider it experimental, but not super. But yeah, it's got some lesser known rappers that most of them I've never heard of, then or since. I haven't heard anything from most of them except U-God, who is associated with Wu-Tang Clan. I think he's kind of an honorary Wu-Tang member. And I think he might be the only rapper actually from New York on this record. I think everybody else might be from LA, though I'm not sure. Some of the rappers are pretty weird though, which I think is really cool. Interesting thing about this record too is that it originally was supposed to be put out by a major label. And when they heard it, they just said that it had no commercial potential. So it actually was supposed to come out earlier than it did. It kind of got shelved until it eventually. And I remember watching the video on MTV2 back in like 2011 to the opening track called Doing Nothing. And it was this really like weird, like animated video that it stopped me in my tracks because it was on MTV Jams at the time. And so it was just like, I was like, whoa, what is this? It's like a really, really strange video. And it sounds almost like this. I don't know if you've ever heard Sensational.
No.
Who used to be he put out an album on Ipecac, and he's like this really crazy lo-fi experimental rapper. And it almost sounds like that, only with like better production. And so that's what really stopped. I was like, whoa, this is on MTV during the day. And it is a weird song, and it's a weird song to start an album off with as well. It's got this like really dizzying beat that's just kind of a loop that just like it almost sounds like, you could almost describe it as it almost sounds like a motor like trying to start or something. Like it's really interesting. And when I say that, it's not noisy. It's just got an off-kilter beat that you don't normally hear on rap songs. In fact, I recently looked this video up, and there were comments of people that are like, this isn't Blue. He would never do a song like this. Wow. And I think that's awesome because it's another example of like how sometimes hip hop can be really, really conservative when it comes to like how people expect hip hop to be done, like hip hop heads or whatever you want to call them. They really want hip hop done a certain way, and they don't want it tampered with, to the point where I've even heard of people wanting councils to like determine what is, appropriate in hip hop and things like that. It's interesting stuff. How and I've said it before, I think people are very protective about hip hop, and it's totally understandable considering where it came from and the culture that is behind it and stuff. But sometimes I think that mentality also leads to stuff like when an artist does do something different, it isn't just rehashing the same sound that they had like in the 90s or whatever, that they're somehow not true hip hop or something, you know what I mean? And so that, that kind of, I think maybe that kind of comes into play because also, like I said, his first album was kind of considered an underground hip hop classic and had, more of a, I'm not going to say straightforward because it really wasn't a straightforward hip hop record, but it had more of a, I guess, something that like old school hip hop fans and new school fans could relate to alike. Whereas this one maybe kind of goes out of the box a little bit. But that's what I really like about it. I think that there's just a lot of really, really cool things, a lot of things that he tried on this record. To my knowledge, I've listened to some of his stuff since. He's never really made another record like it. And so I just kind of think it might have just been an experiment that sort of was just that he just wanted to try at that time. I don't know. What'd you think, Erik?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. The production is super diverse. Honestly, if this was a mixtape, I would not even think, wow, some of this sounds really similar to each other. Like,
Yeah.
it's all over the place. There's elements of old school hip hop, 8-bit, kind of like video game music, noise, a lot of 70s kind of soul works its way in there.
Yeah.
But it's also really psychedelic, and not necessarily like they're using psychedelic samples, but the construction of the songs turns it psychedelic. Like
Yeah.
they have a lot of like phaser and flanger kind of effects happening. So it's swirling like a lot of the time. I think you said dizzying as a description, and that works for me. Like, and the production is so dense. Like there's so much happening. It's so thick, but then there's this constant movement to it. Like things are just moving. And honestly, a couple of tracks, I was listening to this in the car really loud, and it almost started to make me feel nauseous. I know that that's not probably what you should say in a record review of a record you like, but for real, it just got so swirly. And I don't know. I found this to be extremely experimental and like extremely hard to digest, but at the same time, super fun and really well done. And so I don't know. I did like it a lot. I'm just throwing it out there that it gets real weird. So
it is a very strange record. I don't think it's as experimental as like say an Aesop rock record,
right,
or something like that. But at the same time, I actually found parallels between this and an Aesop rock record. Like I actually think that this almost reminded me of Bazooka Tooth at times.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
But I think that there was also like a catchiness to this at times that really isn't on Bazooka Tooth.
Yeah, I agree.
And so like it's so weird to me that MTV chose to let a video to that song Doing Nothing be played. Yeah. I don't know if you knew that or not. That was actually being played on MTV2 during the day, like crazy. Back in 2011 for like probably a year. They would show it like off and on. It's crazy. It definitely is like, I can see why a major label would have been like, okay, we're not putting this out.
Right.
You know,
I can see that too.
It is a crazy, crazy hip hop record. Definitely.
Yeah. It's good stuff though. And it's amazing to me. It came out in 2013, to be honest.
Yeah.
It sounds thoroughly modern. So
it really does. Yeah. It's another one of those situations that I think definitely ahead of its time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I have one more of my picks left. Also came out in 2013. It's by a group called True Widow. The name of the record is Circumambulation. It's kind of a long word. But I really liked True Widow. I thought it was cool. It's twangy. It's dark. It has a lot of reverb, a lot of guitar. It's really druggy. It's very like garage rockish in its own way. It's really shoegazy in another way. And it's really grungy in its own way too.
Yes.
Like the main riffs. It's funny because one of the first things I thought about was this reminds me of Earth. And I had never really, I knew that Dylan Carlson was friends with Kurt Cobain, and I knew that they shared similar realms and things, but I never thought of Earth as being grungy at all. Like it just didn't cross my mind. And then somehow through listening to this, I was like, oh, I get it. Like kind of like when you think of like certain Nirvana intros and stuff, like if that were played on a baritone guitar with a slight amount of distortion and a lot of reverb, then you would have this,
right?
And it's like, oh, I never really put that together. So it is mellow, but it's like heavy, you know, in its own way. For me, it was somewhere in between Earth and Dead Moon and Sonic Youth. Like if you put all three of those things together, that's what you'd end up with. Like I said, it does have this sort of like garage rock druggy element to it. And it's like the things aren't played particularly technically precisely enough to make this like a heavy metal record. It is really loose. And for me, that works though. Like it has a different feel to it, very much like Dead Moon, to be honest. But yeah, if you like twangy, heavy, riff laden stuff, like this is pretty good. It was engaging, but honestly, it was very apathetic sounding, kind of just a lazy rock sound to the whole thing, which I loved. I could put this on and just do anything to it or read to it or just nod off to it, like not nod off in a heroin way, but just like fall asleep to. But I really loved it. And I don't get to hear things like this very often, that in there where it's like twangy and dark. And so I'm always really stoked when I do find something like that. But what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I like this a lot. This, just like you said, it's like the perfect blend to me of doom metal, grunge, even elements of goth, indie rock, and like you said, twang. There's definitely an unmistakable twang to this, and also very minimalist and repetitive, but without getting boring. For some reason, it stays interesting. But at the same time, there's also different things going on, buildups and stuff like that. I like how the vocals interchange between the male and female singer. Like some songs are sung by the guy, and some songs are sung by the girl who's in the group, or I don't even know who all's in the group. Like, so it could be more than one. But anyway, I love the vocals on it. Yeah. You know, and some of it reminded me a little bit of like, I don't know, something like Queens of the Stone Age, like some of the stuff from Queens of the Stone Age. But there's one group right away, especially the first track for some reason, that it really reminded me of. And this might sound like a strange comparison, but especially the first track reminded me a lot of Folk Implosion.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
There was especially that the guy's voice reminds me a lot of Lou Barlow.
Yeah.
A lot. To the point where I almost thought, I had to double check, because I don't know if you've ever heard the Folk Implosion album. Something about a lullaby. I can't think of it.
One part lullaby.
One part lullaby. Yeah. That's it.
I have.
The first track on that song, on that album, sounds a lot like the first track on this album.
Yeah,
to me.
That's cool.
Just the way, and I actually had to look up and make sure this isn't a cover of Folk Implosion or something. Like, and I don't mean that to sound like I'm insulting, but I mean, I thought, well, this almost sounds like that song, because the way that he sung it and the melody that he sung it in, and then the rest of the record, for better or for worse, I couldn't unhear Folk Implosion whenever he sang.
I think that's a really good comparison.
Yeah, and it's really, but it's also darker and doomier than Folk Implosion. It's like definitely way more, like I said, repetitive and, like you said, apathetic. Like it just sounded like they don't give a shit. Let's just get together and rock, which I think is fucking awesome. There needs to be more of that.
I think so too.
Because that's exactly the problem with rock, is too many people care.
Well, they're just trying too damn hard.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and so that's badass. Like that, there's something like this. And also, you know, I also heard, like, say, you know, some Chelsea Wolfe or Emma Ruth Rundle kind of in there. And, you know, the basically the same stuff that I would compare Blackwater Holylight to. However, I think they sound different, both of those bands.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also similar elements that come to me from both bands as well. Yeah, I love this. This is
cool.
Absolutely,
Nice.
absolutely a fantastic record. So,
Nice.
yeah, so that means we go on to the local release now.
Yeah. So the local review we're doing this week, I don't know how I found it. I just found it and I liked it. It's by a project called VoidDweller. The project or this record is called Bandcamp Friday Cash Grab number 478. VoidDweller is from Ottumwa. And that literally is all I know about VoidDweller. So I'd love to know more. Anyway, this release came out in May of 2021, so not that long ago. The description of it basically says, I wanted some money, so I put this out. And it came out on a 3-inch CDR, which is sold out. And I wish I would have gotten in on that because that's awesome. I would say that this record, it reminds me a lot of like other things we've talked about, Div Tech, Youth Code, Decide Today, that kind of like heavy, aggressive, digital hardcore kind of thing. But I do think there's a lot of other stuff happening here. There's elements of industrial, there's unapologetic elements of 90s hip hop. Like I said, digital hardcore, gabber, some vaporwave in their use of certain sounds, synthwave, a heavy dose of punk and even metal, even hardcore at times. This goes everywhere and it does it all really well. I personally really like the 90s elements that are involved in this and the sounds that they use. One song in particular, I think it's Thought Crime, uses like a Windows error sound as part of the music, and it's really fun. There's a lot of like true sort of like 90s hip hop sample sounds too. I swear one of the songs uses the sample from Buffalo Stance by Nana Cherry, or maybe it's a Technotronic song. Either way. And so it has a lot of those types of samples. I really liked this. It was it's super aggressive. It's super noisy, but it's also super fun. It's like tongue in cheek. It's enjoyable to listen to. You're rewarded as a listener who has like the more knowledge you have of the music that this is deriving from, the more you're going to enjoy it. It's almost like inside jokes. It's like esoteric music. Like you hear things and you're like, oh shit, that's hilarious. Or, whoa, that's an amazing use of that, or things like that. It's just super self-aware. I can't wait to listen to more of it. And I really hope that this is also a live project. And if it is, I hope to see it sometime soon. But yeah, I would say if you want to get wound up, get aggressive, but also have a really fun time, this VoidDweller release is awesome. And I can only assume that the other releases are awesome too. So yeah, what'd you think, Dan?
Well, this is what I wrote down in my notes. The best parts of everything. And that's it. That's all I really need to say.
Right.
Like, yeah. I mean, this is just amazing. I almost don't want to know any more about VoidDweller because I'm afraid that I've heard the name. I think VoidDweller's been on some shows in the Quad Cities or something.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think. I don't know if this is a live project or not. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would love to see it live because I would love to see like what, exactly would go down there. But that's it. The best parts of digital hardcore, hip hop, chip tunes, metal, grindcore, gabber, sample music. It's never ending. Punk, metal, industrial, everything is literally in a blender here. And like you said, the references are so great. And sometimes it flies over my head. And sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, he used that.
All right. Exactly.
But the most just in your face example was the remix of Nelly Furtado's Promiscuous.
Yeah.
I thought that was just fantastic.
Yeah.
Everything about this is just like what I want as a listener right now.
Yeah.
There's pop culture references. There's references to, you know, like you said, 90s hip hop, references to, you know, just, I didn't even catch that Windows 95 thing that you mentioned. Like, but I'm sure that once I hear it again, because I will listen to this again, and I'm going to listen to more VoidDweller too.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't know, VoidDweller, if you're listening, would it be, am I ready to hear more of you? It's so good. I really, really enjoyed this a lot. I mean, it was just, I can't even describe it. There definitely is an element of like fun in this too. I feel like whoever is behind VoidDweller has to have a sense of humor.
Absolutely. Yeah. They do have a few different releases available on Bandcamp.
Right. Yep.
And some of them are a condom printed with like a QR code to go get your digital download.
Yeah.
Like it just seems like a lot of fun, and like it's like a commentary on society and consumerism and using Bandcamp Friday against itself. And I just, it seems like a really well fully formed sort of idea and aesthetic and point. Like the point is there, and the point is to seemingly to tear down society as we know it, and I'm into it.
You know what it also reminded me of a little bit is like almost like a metal version of Negative Land or something.
Sure, exactly.
Like, or even like, you remember that one guy that Stunt Rock or whatever?
Yeah, Stunt Rock. Sure.
Kind of reminds me a little bit of that kind of stuff.
I agree.
Like just, but it's basically what this is like an audio zine or something. Like, you know, it's so good. I love this kind of stuff.
Me too.
I love when people use true source material to recycle it and make it into something like, that's why I love cut and paste zines.
Yeah.
And that's really what this is like a audio cut and paste zine.
I agree.
Like an audio collage. I love collage stuff. I think that you should steal from everything.
Yeah.
Steal from everything. And you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. But my recommendation is to check out all the releases on Bandcamp from VoidDweller. Order stuff. Yeah. And I think that I'm going to keep an eye out for this. And if I see they're playing somewhere close, I will be on my way to the show. So.
Yeah, I've got to see this live. Yeah, this is real. I'm so glad you recommended this.
Yeah, it's I like I said, I don't even remember where I saw it, but whoever suggested this or posted about it or recommended it or whatever, thanks. And if it was just my own brain looking around, then thanks to my brain.
Sometimes you got to thank your thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you, thoughts.
Thank you, ladies.
Where would I be without you?
There seems to be like and this is kind of in response to like some of the recommendations that you give, like with the whole vaporwave thing, you know, like this cut and paste music. It does seem to be getting a lot of like attention more and more, or at least more people are kind of wanting to make this kind of stuff. Yeah. And in some ways, I almost feel like this kind of stuff is like almost like anti-music in a way.
Sure.
Like, do you think, because I know that like in the 90s, it was really like this kind of stuff was like few and far between, although a lot of this kind of stuff did exist. Do you think that this is like kind of a response to how, you know, because there's always kind of been this underlying sort of like, we're going to rebel against, you know, music the way that it is in the corporate world. Do you think it's just like coming to a head with a lot of this stuff kind of? I know that this is kind of a basic like question, but I was just wondering what your thoughts about.
Like, do I think this is anti-music?
Yeah, essentially. Do you think
For
that this is
sure.
like anti-music, and do you think that it's coming to a head, like where people are just like, yeah, because everything in the past like 15 years from the creation of something like Bandcamp or Spotify is making people afraid that the music industry is, well, not, it's not making people like you and I afraid. It's making us like cheer it on, because now we can listen to VoidDweller just from going to Bandcamp, you know. But like the music industry is like, this is killing the music industry. And
well, the thing about that is, though, here's what I think, honestly, is the weirder pop music gets, the weirder the response to pop music has to be. And we live in this cycle where pop music is going to take whatever is going on in the underground and use it and homogenize it into something that everyone can listen to, right? But as soon as the underground is on the radio, the underground has to change. And so its response is to tear things down and rebuild it. And then pop music comes along and sees that and steals that and uses it. And then the underground music has to get even weirder. So when I hear pop music now, I'm just like, are you kidding? Like, why does everyone use a vocoder now? Why is there clock division and ratcheting snares and shit in pop music? Why does that synth sound so goofy and strange and, you know, like Amnesia Scanner, even though it's on the pop station? And it's because that's how it works. If you want to keep people on the edge of their seat, you just add those little elements into something that, you know, is sort of a standard issue kind of pop song. And then all of a sudden it's weird. So I definitely think this is a response, and I think it's anti-digestible music. But at the same time, this will probably also get utilized, and it'll just have to keep getting less accessible, you know? That's kind of what I think anyway.
Yeah,
but it's not unlike punk rock, and then punk rock turns into new wave, and then new wave, like then punk rock has to become hardcore, and then, you know, like it just keeps, it has to stay, the underground has to stay one step ahead of what's popular.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting too that one of the things that comes to mind when you talk about modern pop music, I've noticed that there's a certain, like, it seems like a lot of the singers in pop music have like a certain like sound to their voice in a certain way. And I was kind of like, man, they're all sounding like very similar. The ones that I'm specifically thinking of, and I can't think of any, like, I don't know, somebody like, I don't know, Lana Del Rey, you know what I mean? And that's no shade thrown at her, you know, because I actually do enjoy some of her stuff. But like, I was like, where's this kind of sound coming from? You know what I mean? Like, what is the genesis of this? You know, and then I realized that in, like, I saw a video by Cat Power the other day from like '96, and I'm like, this is where like the standard pop vocal of today is coming from. It seems like Cat Power really pioneered a lot of like modern pop music, vocally anyway. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because Cat Power was, of course, an indie musician, you know, back in the day. And it's like, yeah, you listen to a lot of like especially like female pop musicians like today, I hear a lot of like Cat Power's voice, you know? And so I don't know, that for some reason, when you talked about how pop takes elements from the underground and, you know, kind of like restores it in their way, in their approach, that's just that was like the biggest example that came to mind to me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that, you know, it's just sort of how it works. I think it's fun though, because I do think that when we go through these kind of cycles, underground producers get to move up and work with these, you know, pop stars or whatever. And just because they're working with a pop star doesn't mean that they have to give up all their influences and all their experience with music. And, you know, you'll have people in there producing the biggest pop stars who, I mean, like Suicide's probably like their main influence or some shit.
Right.
And so like, I don't know. I don't hate on pop music that much anymore, unless it's total shit. But I'll hear a track here and there where I'm just like, that's cool. Like if I would have heard that 10 years ago, I would have probably been way into it, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's,
I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so
What do you
that,
think?
I think that everything is good.
Cool.
Especially like, you know, anytime I mention VoidDweller, like anytime I'm in a shitty mood, I'm just going to be like, what would VoidDweller do? And that'll make everything better. That's literally what I wrote.
WWVDD.
Yeah. That's literally what I wrote, though, is the best parts of everything.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of anything else to say.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and really good stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can find us on the social medias, Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Accelerativ Thrust on Instagram, on Facebook. We have links to a playlist for the music that we mentioned here. Yeah, check out VoidDweller, and the next episode we should be doing an interview with the amazing Jeff Kaiser, and so listen for that.
All right, thank you for listening all.
Bye.
Bye.